How accountants can manage information overwhelm. It's a common problem. I've seen it for years. I've experienced it myself. But I've got solutions for you. And I want to start by saying the first rule of information overload is to purge that information overload, which means we need some sort of an application wherein we can purge the data. Right? So, for example, looking at an app like Dynalist, I can quickly come in here and create a new document and just start sketching out what is on my mind. Maybe I'm behind on my emails, right? Maybe I am not confident with my email onboarding with my onboarding process for new clients, right? We can increase this list ad infinitum, and it might start to look a little something like this. Okay, so I took the time to sketch it out for you, but I wanted you to see how easy it is to get into Dynalist and start creating this kind of stuff. So Dynalist is definitely the first app I'd recommend using when you're experiencing that overwhelm. Just get the stuff out of your head and into some written form. Of course, if you're the kind of person that prefers pen and paper, by all means do that. But then get it into a medium like this, because in a medium like this, I can do the following. First of all, over here, I can quickly say sort this, right? So let's sort by title A to Z. That might help me just see what I'd gotten down there. And now I can start prioritizing things. Like maybe the first thing is my sales pipeline and prospect management. So you see how easy it is to click and drag and reorder that. And by the way, I've already gone ahead and added in as a sub-level the solution I use for that, Nimble CRM. But we're also going to look at how we can use Airtable for something like this, just to create a very simple conversation tracker, let's call it, right? Because I was working with my friend Chris Brogan maybe a year or so ago, and he had seen that I had just gotten hot on Airtable, so it's probably a little over a year ago. And he asked me because he was trying to use, he didn't want to go to the full extent of a whole CRM. He just needed to keep track of conversations he was having and who he was having them with and when, and just kind of track when to follow up with people. So he showed me what he was doing in Airtable, and I quickly showed him how he can improve on the process and make it a lot more sort of streamlined. So I'm going to show you that in a minute. But in the meantime, we can go into each of these, and I'll show you how within emails I have two solutions. Click up in OneNote. Now, some of you are at this point already are saying, oh my God, all these apps. But the point here is that each app serves a very specific purpose, and when I understand that purpose, it's not overwhelming. It's the opposite. It actually calms my nerves and helps me understand that I have a solution, right? Because the problem is usually not in the problem as we normally think it. The problem is usually in not having a solution, right? I have a solution. When I get into information overwhelm, one of the other things I do is I create these little quick lists. And I do that in Dynalist too, as you can see right here. So that's something else where I'll just sketch out. These are some thoughts in my head that I know are things I need to follow up on. I want to remember them. So I just need a place where I can quickly, and by the way, the mobile app for Dynalist, I'm pointing to my phone here as if you can see it, is also awesome. It has all the functionality of the web app, which is what you're seeing here. And there's a free version which gives you most of what you need. That's the other thing I love about Dynalist is it's not expensive at all. So very easy to get in here and start sketching out what's on your mind and then prioritizing. Now, you could stick with Dynalist. I can go in here and I can say, hey, if I want to implement Nimble CRM, let's put in a due date, right? And then I even have some recurrence features. The recurrence features, I believe, are only available if you have the paid version, which, by the way, isn't much. It's I think it's like $8 a month if you pay for a whole year up front. So like $100 a year if you pay for a whole year up front, which is nothing, especially when you, I think, realize how powerful this app alone really is, right? But to me, this is just a great app for outlining stuff. Then we want to take things into Airtable. So here's a brand new base in Airtable. This is exactly what it looks like when you just go create a new base, right? Right off here, here's my list of bases. You click add a base, you get this, and then I just named it here, and I called it track stuff. Right? So let's use the example that my friend Chris Brogan was giving me about how to streamline things. Now, what he was doing was he was going in very simply, and he was essentially going into the notes field for each kind of record and just putting notes about who he spoke to and when. But no real good tracking for for just that, especially when there's multiple conversations with the same person. So I said, no, here's how Airtable is meant to work, especially in a use case like that. So if I add another tab here, I'm going to create an empty table, and it's called Contact. Okay, and then we're going to go back to table 1 here. I'm going to double click and call this Conversation Log. Now what I'm going to do, and I'm doing this a little fast, I know you can pause the video, but I just want to show you how powerful and how easy this is to set up. So in the context list, the contact I'll put in as if I'm doing it. So Chris Brogan. Okay, and then what I'll want is, I don't really need much more information. Maybe what I'll do is insert left here. I right-click the field, and I would put his phone number in here, right? And you have a field type specifically for phone numbers in Airtable, so very easy to do, right? Okay, and then I could put notes here generally about the contact itself, but the key to this now is to go here to the conversation log. And for the first field, instead of name, and you're going to see why the name has to be in a different column actually, is this is where we're going to look things up, right? So I might put like something like topic, right? Something very generic like that. Because this first column is a very special column. If I'm looking things up in this table later on, this is the column that I look things up by. So I might want to look things up by topic. But now we're going to add a column, and we're going to actually call this contact. And now what we're going to do is for this type of field, we're going to say link to another record. This is going to allow me to create a link to the other table where the contacts are so that we can simply select from there. And here are the two tables, conversation log and contacts. So of course I'll choose contacts. I'm not going to allow linking to multiple records from here. And I'll click save. I want to move this over, just click and drag, really easy to do. So the topic might be new opportunity, whatever. And then here, I'm going to pick Chris Brogan as my contact. And now I can go into the notes, and I can say, discussed new opportunity. When I showed this to Chris, he was blown away because he says, now this makes total sense, because now in here I can log lots of different conversations that I have with Chris about the different topics. I have to spell correctly. That's always good. And it's really easy to keep track of that. Plus, if I use this log to track conversations with multiple contacts, you can use the grouping feature to group it by contact, so I can quickly focus on a particular contact. Similarly, I can filter by contact, right? So there's lots of ways I can sort of cut up the data now that I'm in Airtable, right? A couple of other use cases I'll show you for how Airtable has helped me. Another classic example is tracking subscriptions. That's becoming more and more prevalent. Again, going back to the whole, oh my God, all these apps conversation, right? So let's have an example here of one that I did recently where we actually did a Zoom on this, on tracking your app. So here's App Tracker, and this is an example. So I started to lay out in a simple list, right? Here's apps by category. So I have accounting apps, and then I have project management and workflow, right? And you can see I have these grouped. If I go to master list, I actually had created this grouping and then made a copy of it to save that. It's almost like saving a report. So now in the master list, I can remove the grouping. So kind of backing up, this is what I created at first, just listing out the different apps, the URL, assigning a category which has its own table. And so the rule here about stuff like this is when I know I'm going to be repeating something multiple times in a table, that thing probably needs to get its own table. That's the basic rule of how to set these things up. Then I said it'll be useful to assign a status. So this is done as what's called a single select dropdown. And of course, I define what the options are. And you can sort them however you want. As you can see, I can quickly get them alphabetized. But what's really cool about the way this works is when I have, let's say, a lot of apps in here with different statuses assigned, if I go to sort by this column, it doesn't necessarily sort alphabetically unless I've chosen to put them in alphabetical order. It sorts them in the order that I've set them up here. So I can prioritize things like a status and basically drive how that gets sorted in that way. That may have nothing to do with alphabetical, which is exactly what I want. Right? Of course, the amount. What does this app cost me, and what's the frequency? Is that annual or monthly? Right? So now we're seeing a combination of a list of apps and how I categorize them, and also tracking when the next renewal date is and how much that is and how frequently. Right? So this is a great app for allowing for tracking of any kind of information where you might be overwhelmed. Let's look at another use case that I also did a recent Zoom on educational resources. So again, the example here, and I used Hector and myself as the example, if I go into the master list here and I just get rid of the grouping. Here we just start making a list of different courses you might be enrolled in, courses of mine and courses of Hector's. And you can put in, if it's a live event, the starting and ending time. These are just two different date-based columns. And by the way, once you have this, you can go into a calendar view, and it will show you exactly everything that you've got in there, but laid out, as you can see, in a calendar view. But I can go on, and then again, where I'm going to repeat something like the author, because hopefully you want to enroll in lots of my courses, then you might want to manage a separate table for the author. So you have me and my company and a link to my website and my Facebook page, and same with Hector, a link to his website and so on. And now I can quickly group it by author, which we've established here. Okay, and then another grouping because I've got a category assigned for the different kinds of courses or programs I might be enrolled in, so I can look at it by category. So what Airtable does is, first in the sort of raw table format, it lets me just purge the data, get it out of my head and into a table, and then I can start organizing it, and then I can start sort of reporting on it by creating these different views. And by the way we create these different views, really easy to do. From the master list where everything's in just a raw table, you can choose group or filter, or you can do some combination of grouping and filtering, and of course sorting where applicable. So I go pick a field to group by, and let's say I want to group it by cost, right? Which might be a little weird. Some of these don't have costs associated with them here. But just so you can see how this works, if I go back and do it by category, then once I've got this organized the way I want it, right up here, this ellipsis, I click duplicate view, and that will make a copy, and then I can click here and rename it. So that is exactly how I created these different views that you see in this drop-down by author, by category, and so on. So this is my best solution for you, and I realize some of you are going to say, well, it's making it worse, not better, because I'm asking you to look at perhaps more apps. But the reality is that's the world we live in, is using apps, and using apps to track the apps if necessary. Because at the end of the day, the way I look at it is as follows. I don't care about how many apps I have to learn how to use. I think of it like this. I have a toolbox. I'm filling that toolbox with lots of different tools. I love learning new apps. I don't get overwhelmed by them. Instead, I look at them as something exciting because I think, okay, here's a new tool. I can learn how to use this, and then think in terms of what other jobs, what other things can I do for customers, for example, that I couldn't do before, or maybe I can do something better. So when I first discovered Airtable, for example, a lot of people who know me said, hey, Seth, does this replace Smartsheet? And I said, no, absolutely not. Is there a lot of overlap? Definitely, without a doubt. But does it replace it? No. There are definitely some use cases where Smartsheet is going to do a better job, and definitely use cases where Airtable is going to do a better job. Airtable's core sort of superpower, in my opinion and experience, is in its ability to easily link data in different places. Keep in mind, I'm just giving you the example of where there's two tables. You could add all the tables you need to track all different kinds of things within a single base is what it's called, because it's really like a database, and easily link things back and forth. I mean, I'm only scratching the surface with you here for now. You can look things up. You can do the equivalent of a sum if. In Airtable, it's called a roll-up. So if you know Excel formulas, there's a lot of Excel stuff that you can do here in Airtable, and when you sort of combine the way Airtable lets you link data with some of these other functions you can incorporate into your database, it makes it a really powerful tool for tracking just about anything. And I love using the phrase to describe things like this, and this is what makes me fall in love with an app like I've done with Airtable, is this idea of if you can conceive it, you can create it. And as you can see, I didn't need to know anything technical to do any of the stuff that I've shown you in these last almost 15 minutes in Airtable and, of course, back in Dynalist. And then if you're using other things I love, like Google Docs, very easy, of course, to create a link in Airtable back to a Google Doc. So if for some reason you have a Google document, perhaps with even more detailed notes or better formatted notes, you can certainly create a link to a Google Doc right here. You can attach a document, but if you're actually looking for a separate field for a Google Doc, you would want to do it as a URL, right? Because with Google Docs, you're not actually attaching a document. It's a URL, and you have a field type specifically for URL. So I can copy and paste the link to that Google Doc right here, where I might start with this and then later on go back and write up detailed notes and clean them up. And that way I have really nicely formatted notes. But this is Command Central here, where I would be tracking the conversations, so that later on when I go back and look over the conversations I've had with Chris, I can access those Google Docs and and get to them quickly from here. I don't have to sit there and first go into Google Drive and browse the whole folder structure to go find this. I leave myself the trail of breadcrumbs that I need. Cloud apps make that very easy to do, so I can quickly get from one thing over to another. Now, I mentioned the email thing, and I do want to touch on that. So I'll give an example of why I use two different apps for email. And I mentioned this in the write-up, of course. There are two things essentially that I'm going to do with an email other than archive or delete them, right? If I'm done with it, I just archive it. If it's garbage, then I just delete it. But after that, I'm going to use this email from Jay Abraham as the example. So if this were a task, if this email represented a task or maybe a list of tasks that somebody emailed me, and these are things I need to do and follow up on, and especially where I want to make sure they're getting done by a certain date, then I use an app called ClickUp for project management, and ClickUp has a Chrome extension you can install, which puts this icon on every single email, which I can now click on, and in about 30 seconds, I can get this added in as a new task in ClickUp, and I have all the access I need here. I can assign it to myself. I can assign the due date, everything I need to do. I can write up the description explaining why I'm adding it. Everything I need to know I can do real quick right from here. And as soon as I click that and click Create New Task, it gives me this desktop notification with this link here that lets me go right into that task and click up. But another thing I want to show you is that what it also does is create that link on the email. So now this is linked directly to that task in ClickUp. So I can file this for now, but if I get back to it later on directly in Gmail, I have a quick link over to the related task. In the task, it also puts a copy of the email in as an attachment to the task, which I can easily use to click back to the original email in Gmail. Why is this useful and important? Because a lot of times after I'm done with the task or whatever follow-up I need to do, I want to get directly and quickly back to this email, so then I can go hit the reply button and reply to the person and let them know that it's done or whatever information I may need to let them know. Now, the other option, which is more the case of an email like this, where Jay Abraham's a marketing guy that I follow and really look up to, and when he sends me an email like this, it's not an urgent task that needs to get done. It's just something I want to refer back to later, but I don't want to leave it sitting in my inbox. I like to keep my inbox fairly clean. So then I'm going to forward it to OneNote. And I'm just going to forward it to me at onenote.com. OneNote recognizes my email address, and it knows which notebook that's associated with. So instead of having a special email address for your notebooks or whatever, it just recognizes the email associated with your OneNote account, and then it puts it into a default location which you specify in your OneNote settings. So once I hit send, it will go into OneNote. Sometimes it will take a few minutes to appear, but here it is, and this I forwarded ahead of time. I'm not trying to be tricky. I just didn't want to have to wait for a mail service to show up. It may well show up as a second copy while I'm talking to you. But as you can see, this is what it comes in looking like when you forward it. Nicely formatted, very easy to refer back to and read. And then if there were links in here, I would have them. And that's it. So I forward emails to OneNote when it's more something I just want to go back to and read later. And I use ClickUp on my emails when it's something I need to follow up on as, say, an important task. That, my friends, is about 20 minutes worth on hopefully what you'll find very helpful in terms of how you can manage information overload. The quick recap is just purge the stuff that's in your mind, get it down in some visible written format so you can start organizing and prioritizing, and then, of course, executing whatever it is that you need to get done. And there it is. So it took a minute, and now this one that I just forwarded showed up. So no tricks up my sleeve, just trying to demonstrate for you exactly how this stuff works, and hopefully you can see clearly why I do it, why I use it, and why it helps me relieve myself of any kind of information overload. That, my friends, is what I have for you today on this. As always, I hope you learned something here, had some fun along the way. I hope you're having an absolutely fantastic day, and I look forward to seeing you on the web.